All right. Well, welcome, Mike Bondy. Appreciate you coming down today.
No, thanks very much, Dan. My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I think about 40 years since we're throwing dirt at each other across the road.
At least.
Something like that. Yeah,
well,
at least. Don't say at least.
Yeah, that
Don't
means I started when I was 13. So
maybe I was a little younger, so maybe you're picking on us.
Yeah,
I'm not
yeah.
positive.
I wouldn't do that anymore.
No. Okay, so to start with, first question, and I just want to frame this properly. So in March of 2022, Council decided to move the temporary emergency homeless shelter to a former elementary school on Murray Street without consulting the residents in the neighborhood. No public meetings prior to Council decision, no open houses, no surveys, no direct communication with residents at all prior to approving staff recommendation. 23 deputations asking for prior public consultation were ignored by the majority of Council and the Mayor. So, being as you were a part of Council, and this all kind of happened, you were closer to this than anybody else that we even talked to yet. So how would you, moving forward, how would you ensure that proper prior public consultation take place?
Well, to be honest, it's very difficult to do if the recommendation comes from staff, because it's just sort of presented to us the Wednesday before the Monday meeting, which does not allow for enough time. That's when we see the agenda. So what I did on that night of that council meeting that we voted on the shelter, I made a motion to defer the decision so that consultation could happen. Right. And that was defeated by council. So that's how it could be done. If we sort of have the feeling, hey, you know, things aren't right, not enough information's out there, these people in their deputations clearly have questions that haven't been answered, that is the mechanism, is to defer.
Right.
Which I tried and it failed. I don't know what it failed by, but it failed pretty substantially.
Right.
And of course, you know, administration speaks to it and says, oh, well, if we don't make a decision tonight, it's going to be terrible, the sky's going to fall. And, you know, so council listens to that and then, oh, well, we better make that decision tonight. But that's the way to avoid shutting out the public is, and we can do it. You just defer. We can defer anything. We don't have to make a decision on anything anytime. And that's the way to do it, is just to say, okay, we need a couple more weeks. And that was attempted by me and supported by others, but not by enough. So
okay, so then what is it, a time frame issue between the agenda item being brought up and the vote, so that you have more time to maybe get people on your side in order to defer? Is there like, it seems to me that that's a very small window for you to get people to buy in. How many people do you need to buy in order?
10.
Say 10.
You need 10 votes to successfully do anything.
Okay, so you need 10 votes, but they're giving you 2 days. So
basically, excluding the weekend, yeah.
Is that a systematic problem then that can be remedied?
Yeah, that's really a question more for administration, because I can't speak for them, but
right.
But we've many times have said, you know, how can you give us this thing on Wednesday? The public gets it Thursday, we get it Wednesday. And we have to make a decision by Monday? Like monumental decisions, big ones, like this.
Yeah, this is a big
little
decision. Things
like, oh, should we sever a house on a farm? Well, that requires about 10 minutes of thought.
Yeah.
But these things require, these and other, you know, big decisions. There's probably 3 or 4 big decisions every term of council. This would be one of them, if not the biggest one this time. Like the tree cutting bylaw, for instance. That's another one. That's very, very divisive and very complicated. And we'll get the report and the recommendation on Wednesday and vote on it on Monday. And I recall years ago, we did defer the tree bylaw because there was just too much noise, too much going on. There's no way we could get our head around it. So we deferred it, and by deferring it, you can defer it to the next council meeting, which may be in 1 week or 2, or you can defer it for 3 months.
Right.
So that's what we should have done. That I tried to do. I made the motion, it didn't work, but so there is a way to do it. But is it a systematic problem? Yeah, I don't think anybody on council likes, you know, Wednesday we're presented with God knows how many different items on an agenda. It varies from week to week. And by Monday night, we're voting. So, you know, if you're a busy guy, like I'm a pretty busy guy with family.
Yeah.
You know, my weekends are gobbled up, right, with kids and stuff. So you really got to pack in your homework. Like, it's doable, but it's not the best system in the world. No.
It sounds like the staff has a lot of power. Like if you've only got 3 days.
Well, yeah, because there's
that's a big issue for 3 days.
Things can be sprung on us, and from time to time, including this one, staff will say, you know, we really have to have a decision today. We really have to have a decision.
But kind of a self-declared emergency.
Well, one could say so. They would argue against that, but because it was brought up when I made the motion to defer, staff had indicated, oh, it's got to be done tonight, or there's going to be all these problems And again, when that's presented to me, it's really hard to argue it backwards. So they're prepared for it more than I am.
Right.
You know, like staff in a certain department, that's their full-time job. That's what they do. After the vote on the shelter, well, then we move on to something else. So I'm not a schooled professional in every, nor is anybody on council. You can't be. But staff are experts in their department, and we're not experts in every department. It's impossible.
Right. Well, nobody can be.
Nobody can be. That's why they work 40 hours a week on one issue.
Yeah.
So they can be pretty prepared to say this is an emergency decision that has to be made tonight. And we went through the same thing with St. Paul's. It was a zoning issue, but just as contentious. We have to. And I wanted to defer that one, and no, we can't do that. Like, we could have, easily.
Well, you just need 10 votes.
10 votes would have deferred it for a week. And frankly, if it's that big of an emergency, which I don't think this one was, if that's the case, staff could call an emergency meeting of council to deal with one issue. We went through that with the Capitol Theatre a number of times. We would go in on a Wednesday at 2 o'clock. Mm-hmm. Because that one was very time sensitive because of money. So anything can really be done, but you just need the will of council to do it. You need 10 votes. 10's the magic number for everything.
I guess, and just from the outside looking in, it seems to me that it's set up to eliminate that ability, because you're getting 10 votes when none of you are prepared for the conversation. I mean, maybe you're somewhat prepared, but you're not as prepared as staff.
No.
And to go into the nuances of it, which is what you need to do, right? I mean, to me, the district, obviously, I've got an opinion about this, but it doesn't matter right now. But the reality is to go into the nuances of it and have these conversations with other people that also have families on Saturdays and Sundays, and you know, maybe that's part of your job as council, be working on the Saturdays and Sundays. That's not for me to decide. But how do you actually protect the people who elected you from situations where, like this, which are big decisions in our lives? I mean, it's hundreds and thousands of dollars in equity lost in real estate, and you know, not to mention all the crime and all the things that have happened and elevated in the neighborhood over 3 working days, for you to actually collect those 10 votes. To me, that seems like could be. I mean, would that not be, if we could extend that to maybe if it's a big issue, we could elevate it to this is an A priority issue. We need 15 days to decide about this and have conversations about it?
And we can do it by that motion that I made to defer, which failed.
Right.
So council decided, no, we're going to make that decision tonight. And the other thing that we should mention was there 23 deputations?
Yeah.
So we received 23 deputations that we don't receive in advance. When they're read, that's the first time we hear them, unless people email them into us, which they sometimes do. Mm-hmm. Primarily no. So we hear 23 deputations, and we're to make a decision in 40 minutes. There's no time to absorb those deputations, clearly.
Yeah.
You know, so that's why I made the motion to defer, because hey, we just heard 23 stories. Like, let's have some time, maybe ask for copies of them to reread them. That's why we should have pushed the decision off. And maybe the result may have been the same. But we should have had more time to absorb, digest, all of this stuff, and we didn't. And again, I think that would make some sense to you, that 23 deputations, we hear them.
Same thing.
40 minutes later, vote.
Yeah. So the question to me is, what is there? Who do you actually talk to? Maybe it's not at the council level, but who do we talk to as a group of concerned citizens to say, well, that 3 days isn't enough. We need our council members to have more time before they even have to defer it, because to get 3 days to get 10 votes on people that are divided is not easy. You know?
No, it's difficult.
You know, especially if no one knows the nuances, right? I bet you they figured the nuances out when we started having meetings. You know, because that's when things started all of a sudden getting shaky, right?
Yeah, which was too late. But
which was too late.
And if you went to staff, and you know, there may be provincial laws on this thing too. There's a municipal act, and that may dictate that. You know, I don't know that, because I've never really had to really concern myself with it. Because back to what I was initially saying. If you went to administration and said, council doesn't have enough time,
yeah,
they'd say, well, then they just defer it. Like, that would be the answer that they would give you. Well, then council just defers.
Right. So there's an issue there. It's not an answer. That's an issue.
It's tricky.
Yeah.
But their answer, I would think, is true, that council has the ability to defer. But you need 10 votes to do it.
You have the ability to defer, but you don't have the time to get the nuances in a room all together and say, these are the nuances of the conversation.
No, because we're
Right.
in a public setting, so I can't say to Councillor A.
It's like telling me I've got the power to do 100 push-ups a day, but you have to start
Yeah.
today and you have to do them all in a row. Well, wait a minute. I don't have a power to do that.
Not
You
today.
Not today. Give me a week.
And that
You know?
that kind of thing, like to get those 10 votes, you really should have the time as a councillor to phone call other councillors, off the record.
Yeah.
And say, hey, listen, I'm not comfortable making this decision this quickly. I'm going to make a motion to defer. Will you support me on it? Well, I don't know, Michael. Why? Well, because
A, B, C,
it
D.
gives me the ability to, convince the person to support the deferral.
Yeah.
And I didn't have that.
Yeah.
So-
okay, fair. And I don't mean to push it.
No, I get it. It's a good question.
This interview is going different than the questions I sent you, and I'll be very upfront about that because you're giving me information that actually allows me to take this to other places. So that's
Oh, yeah,
great.
we can go anywhere you like.
I appreciate it. That's
Sure, of
that's
course.
that's great. So moving forward then in situations like this, how would you ensure staff recommendations are more detailed and transparent to allow for public consultation opportunities? Is there a way to do it?
Frankly, no. The only way to do it, like technically there's really no way to do it. But through a common sense, we and you guys, the public and council, could say, okay, this is a big one. Let's put this off and just ask them to do the right thing and not rush these big decisions. But like in a technical way, I don't think there is a method, a process to do that, to prioritize one agenda item over another. Because some may say, well, hey, the decision to rebuild that bridge in Dover Township is monumental to my constituents. And I may say, well, it's kind of a no-brainer to me. Because we have such a divided council, and we have so many different issues that obviously some issues are more important to me than to other councillors.
Right.
Because I represent a ward, so the issues in my ward, naturally, are more important to me. So, can you prioritize agenda items? No. Could the agenda come out earlier? Please. I don't know if there's a provincial law against that. I doubt it. I couldn't see
We'll find
why.
out. We'll find out.
Yeah, because that's the municipal act,
we'll
right?
do that research for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because it'd be great if, and sometimes, and again, every council meeting is different, and I've been to many of them. Some of them, the agenda, I still pick up the paper copy because I'm a dinosaur. I like paper. But some are that big and some are that big. You don't know. Some council meetings start at 6 and are over at 7:25. Some start at 6 and we go till 11 o'clock.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. You put a big decision at the end of a long agenda, people are sort of zoned out and tired. Mm-hmm. And many people work during the day, and this is an evening thing. So if you start work at 8 in the morning, by 10:30 at night, you may not be quite as tuned in, right?
Yeah.
And all of council's complained about that. How can we have such a light agenda and then 2 weeks later it's jam-packed? Mm-hmm. Couldn't we balance it out? And maybe we should meet every Monday instead of, random Mondays. Just have shorter meetings, more of them. Mm-hmm. So these are all things that, could and should be hashed out, in the next term of council.
So if you get elected again, is that stuff that you'll be looking at? Like now that
Absolutely.
you're thinking about it? I don't know if you were thinking about it prior.
I've talked about it with Doug many times, that we should balance out our agenda meetings because some of them are very, very heavy. Mm-hmm. And we know, and everybody knows, if you have a contentious issue like the shelter, it's not going to be 25 minutes of conversation. It's going to be an hour and a half.
Yeah.
And it's going to get, deputations take a long time. There was an issue about closing a service center in Dresden a couple of weeks ago. There were 53 deputations. Well, by the time you get through 53 deputations, you're at 8:30 at night.
Yeah.
So knowing that agenda should be very thin, because most things are not priority, like tender awards and things of that nature. They're more sort of housekeeping things, but they still have to be addressed. But they could probably be pushed around. I'm sorry, I'm
pushed back to the next
but
week.
When you have a big item like this one, maybe make that a one-item council meeting, and then we've got all night to discuss it. We're tuned in, instead of you're 14th on the agenda. You
Yeah.
know, it's just, it doesn't,
That
it's
makes
very
sense.
imbalanced.
That makes some sense. Yeah.
And we're all paid well, you know, some would say too much, but including me, but, you know, to come in for an extra evening is fine. That's within our job description, right? So,
Yep.
and this one, tree cutting bylaw, Capitol Theater previously, those should be one item meetings.
Yes.
We're zoned in, we've got a week to go over the report, to speak to the public, which we didn't have any time in this case. So that would be something I'd like to see happen. And that's an administrative decision.
But you can push forward as a council.
Yeah, and we can almost demand it as a council. But then what decisions are deemed that high priority? Well, that's going to be different.
Some criteria involved, you know.
Well-
Does it affect, you know, one group of people that are 5 people, or does it affect 500 people, or does it affect, you know, or is it? There's all sorts of ways that would have to hash out. But that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting, because that sounds like something I would like to have somebody stand on to help things run more smoothly.
It would certainly change things, that's for sure.
Do you feel like CK Council requires more information from staff to make effective? And I want to change this. Do you feel? I think we've already answered it. So
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw it out there. You can just say yes or no to this one. Do you feel like CK Council requires more timely information from staff to make effective decisions?
On certain items, yes. Some are very well done, and we are informed. So I wouldn't say on everything, but yes, from time to time.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
certainly the case. So that would be in the yes column, I guess.
Fair enough. I think we already asked and answered. How do you handle conflict of interest? So in terms of your own, you know, your history with the board, with the council, and moving forward, like if you have a conflict of interest, what is your what do you do? How do you manage that?
Well, it's an interesting question because, and I didn't realize this until I became part of council. Conflict of interest is an arbitrary decision. If I feel I have a conflict of interest, I can declare it.
Right.
If I don't feel, I don't. There have been situations, I don't recall the circumstances, where I've asked Mayor Hope at the time, do I have a conflict? And he's like, you tell me. So it's up to me. I thought, you know, I was asking Randy's
That's interesting.
experience, right? And he said, if you think you do, you do. If you don't think you don't, you don't. So it's really an arbitrary decision. Now, if I was to vote on, I don't know, putting a free public swimming pool in the backyard of 117 Victoria Avenue, where I live, that would certainly be a conflict. And if I didn't declare it, somebody from council, administration, or the public could go to the integrity commissioner, and then she would make the decision whether or not I was in conflict. But that's how much leeway we have on conflict of interest.
But isn't it just defined as if you have a conflict of interest is because you've got a decision that's pending that's going to financially benefit somebody, either yourself, your family, or your extended family, financially?
It is, but that definition is so broad that I've seen many councillors many times declare a conflict on a hot item. You know, 'cause
Right.
not all of them are comfortable, obviously. And somebody declare a conflict, and you know, their son's brother-in-law, his uncle's dog, like, you know, walked through that park one day. And you think, oh, you know, just to kind of back off it. So it's a personal decision whether you want to declare a conflict or not. If it's glaring, then obviously.
Right.
But for instance, and I'll use myself as an example. The road work on Victoria Avenue. Somebody said, oh, well, would Michael have a conflict on that? And I called the integrity commissioner and said, do you think? She said, no, absolutely not. You live on the road, but you represent your neighbors, so no, you don't. But that could be one where, hey, the value of my home could go up with a new sewer system, could go down if all the trees are killed. So I definitely would have like a financial interest in that.
Right.
But the integrity commissioner, Ms. Bench, who I greatly respect, said, no, you don't, not at all. So it's pretty broad. Again, if it's a glaring conflict, then it's a no-brainer.
Okay, thank you. Okay, to the next framing. On March 7th, 2022, a staff recommendation to expand facility programs at Hope Haven was put on hold to investigate a $1.2 million offer from a secret group of investors to move the shelter away from downtown. The new staff recommendation with the new investor option was presented as a done deal in the Chatham Daily News on Friday, March 18th, 2022, and passed by council and mayor on Monday, March 21st. Okay, so done deal. Question: would you have voted for the homeless shelter in a residential neighborhood? Well, you told me that you
I voted against
you
it,
voted against it,
even though
Okay.
I was the guy on the Chatham Daily News.
Okay, so let's talk about that. Let's just real quickly, because I might have been one of the guys throwing shade at you for this. So, you know, when we were in these meetings
lost
over
track.
here, right? Yeah, there's a few of us, I think.
I
right?
think so.
Because, I mean, you were the face of it. And what we saw was you're endorsing.
Right.
So why endorse
And I
something?
grew up here.
Why endorse? Oh, yeah, I mean, like I say.
I grew up on the street that we're sitting in right now.
That's right.
50 years my mother lived here.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I'm familiar with the name.
So what was your intent behind endorsing it? Or what was your
Well, my initial thought, I was called by the newspaper, and 10 minutes later I'm standing in front of the building, and I thought, yeah, maybe this is a decent location. So it's going somewhere. I was against a homeless shelter and always have been. And the policy of the municipality, for as long as anyone can remember, was that we would not, sorry, I've got a wasp, was that we would not have a bricks and mortar shelter in Chatham. That was the policy. We put people in hotels, motels, and then transitioned them into permanent housing. And that's what we did forever. And that was great. I love that idea. It seemed to work. It was one less department, less staff. You know, I don't like seeing government grow. If anything, I like smaller government.
We're on
Right?
the
It's
same
just sort of
page.
my theory. But so I was opposed to any homeless shelter wherever it would go. But I can read the writing on the wall, and it was going to happen, right? Because with the pandemic, which somehow created homelessness, we went to the Bradley Center first, and then we went to the Travel Lodge. So we're clearly now in the business of a homeless shelter. So it's going somewhere. And frankly, I thought Victoria Park seemed like a pretty reasonable idea. Seemed to be somewhat removed from residential, a residential surrounding. Not totally, but you know the location, you know, and there's nothing behind it. There's a track beside it. So I thought this seems like a reasonable idea. Then I heard from you guys, and loud and clear. So that's why I voted against it. That's why I made the motion to defer, because I was wrong. Like, admittedly, and I'm not always right, and I was wrong on that one. Fair enough. Like,
I appreciate
guilty
that.
as charged. Right?
Like I told you, I appreciate the fact that a man can make a mistake and say I was wrong. I was wrong on that one. So
and
I appreciate that.
That's our job. Is if we have something in our mind that, you know, we think something's, you know, either a good idea or a bad idea. Because I kind of got criticized for flip-flopping. People go, oh, he changed his mind.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm supposed to do.
That's right.
Like, when you hear from people, the point is that they're trying to either convince you of A or B. So if you're listening and you change your mind, I think I did the right thing, rather than being stubborn, saying, "Oh no, I've made my mind up." No, I had that long weekend. Well, it wasn't a long weekend; it was a long weekend for me.
Right.
To hear from people, and of course, excuse me, many people in this neighborhood know me because they grew up here, so they know how to find me, and, you know, I'm easily accessible. So I had that 3 days of listening to people, and sure enough, I was wrong. Nope, bad location. Start over, which is why I voted against it.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's good. I appreciate that, and I'm glad you got into the conversation and how you changed your mind. What kind of information would you like see? Well, I think maybe we've covered this, but I'm going to just take a different angle. What kind of information would you like seeing moving forward in order to make the right decision on these things? You know what I mean? Like, maybe that's too loose. You know what? I think we've covered it.
We kind of did, but
Yeah,
I'll just briefly comment on it. But we have sort of covered it. But there needs to be more public consultation when it comes to monumental decisions. And we have already discussed that, but that's what I would like to see happen, is more transparency. And we've been through it with a number of different issues that are big ones that affect a small group of people profoundly. And, you know, again, we're just sort of, I find we're rushed into it. So if it's, yeah, I'm repeating myself, but if it's a priority hot topic item, let's give ourselves a couple of weeks, not a couple of days, to gather information and frankly, to listen to people. Like I had 3 days, I changed my mind very quickly. But that doesn't always happen. But you guys were very good at it, right? Like, you chimed in really quickly. So
with the time we had, right?
With the,
and that's where
not enough.
I think as a community, we'd all like a little bit more time to help to go through all the details of what happens if this happens. What happens if this shelter's put in place? What kind of support are we getting from the city? What kind of before just yelling, okay, I don't want it in my backyard. Well, obviously we need to have something to help the homeless people and the people who are struggling, because there's people struggling in this community. But yeah, more time. I agree with you. I think that's more time and more information is always good. Okay, and would you require municipal staff to regularly make progress reports to council on the operation of the shelter? Like, would you consider doing that and the impact of the neighborhood?
No, absolutely. I think it probably, if that's not in place, then it certainly should be. We get status reports on the Capitol Theatre, the Bradley Center, status of arenas, assets that we own. Now, we don't own this one, but we do because we operate it. We don't own the bricks and mortar, but we lease it. So that's kind of a moot point. But again, like every year, we get a status report. It's typically financial for these other assets, right? Like the Bradley Center and the Capitol Theatre, the two big ones that come to mind. So this should be no different.
Okay. Is that happening now?
I don't think so. I don't know. But it hasn't been open long enough that we would have received that yet.
Right.
So
how often would reports come in?
Well, annually for the other two, but I think quarterly would be a better idea with this one.
Okay.
Because it's a fast-moving situation here.
Yeah.
So I think a quarterly report, staff could come to council, be a report for information only, which means we're not voting on anything. But and when I say we, I mean you. Like, staff reports to council, which is like the public.
Yeah.
So that would be a public update, if you will. What are the numbers? What are the different stats that go along with the numbers? And that could easily be gathered. Like that's data they've got at their fingertips. So I'd say quarterly, 15-minute presentation from staff. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and then, okay, good, thank you. So homelessness in Chatham-Kent. Homelessness is not unique to Chatham-Kent. Communities across the country are struggling with the problems that lead to homelessness and with finding support, services, and resources necessary to help people, right? So what do you think are the leading causes of homelessness in CK right now?
Substance abuse and mental illness, I think, are probably, from what I personally witness.
Okay.
I see a lot of drugs and psychotic episodes, which may be related to drugs. I don't know.
Well, that's right.
They could be one and the same, right? One may lead to another, but like I live in the downtown core, so I see a lot of the same stuff. I don't see it on the volume you guys are, but I live on an alley, and my little daughters asked me to look out the window 3 weeks ago, 2:30 in the afternoon. There's two guys shooting up in the alley, like below our window, and I knocked on the window. I'm like,
yeah.
And they got up and walked away, but so and I know they're homeless because I know them. Like, I don't personally know them, but I've seen them before.
Right.
So yeah, to me, it would be mental illness and addiction, and of course, there's people that have just fell on hard times, but I don't think they're the problem. I think they find help and they pull themselves out of that situation. It's the chronic homeless that I think is really more the issue here. And yeah, so those two contributing factors I think are primary causes.
How do you think it should be handled?
That's a difficult question. If I had the answer.
That's a big one.
It's a big one.
That's a very short question for a big question.
And we don't have the answer, because if we did, we would have solved it. Like, we threw all the money in the world at it if we had to, if we could solve it, but I don't have an answer for it. I don't know. Like, it seems like it's a growing problem. Obviously, you grew up here, I grew up here. We did not have this when I grew up, nor did other places. Society's changed. But the solution to homelessness, I don't know. I really don't. Like, honestly, I don't have an answer for it. I think what we can do as a municipality and as a, citizen of Chatham-Kent, do our best to assist in, social programs, assistance, addiction resources, those sort of things. But do they solve it? No, because we've tried it and it hasn't worked. I think we can mitigate the problem, but as far as solving it, I don't have the answer. If I did, I would be happy to tell you, but I don't.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Council, but just take a moment, please, and let us know, not so much why we should vote for you, but what do you bring to the table? What would you like to say? What message would you like to say?
What I bring to the table this election versus previous elections, experience. And I think you can probably see some of that through our conversation today. I know how things work at the municipality. Not all of it, obviously. But I do have that experience on the process, which it takes a couple of years for sure. Because when you're first elected, there's no training. You're there, you sit over there. So I think experience is helpful. And for the 3 terms that I've been on council, I think, or I've tried anyway, to ask tough questions, make hard decisions. It doesn't make me a very popular guy at City Hall, which is sometimes a little uncomfortable, but not in the last couple of years because we've been virtual, so you don't have to say hi to anybody. But so there's that. I think I listen to people, I respond to people, I do my best to help solve their problems when they have problems. And I've always stood for smaller government, lower taxes, just been my thing since the very beginning. I'm not a real big spender, which again doesn't make me all that popular with everybody, but that's something I think our taxes are too high. And they are, but there's the argument, but like our taxes are the mill rate, which is really, it's the tax rate, it's the value of your home times the mill rate, which equals your taxes. Ours are 3 times that of Toronto, triple. And I think it's unacceptable. I think it'd be difficult to nearly impossible to actually lower our taxes because they just don't seem to come down. So I think we have to be more efficient. It's a hard fight. I've asked for reductions in staff, reductions in spending over the years. I don't really get anywhere with it, but at least I say it. So I bring that, and I think I'm not going to claim to do or be anything, but I try to be responsive to people. And like in this case, this circumstance of the homeless shelter, I did listen. And, it's not easy to say you're wrong, but sometimes you're wrong. But of course, I figured it out before I voted, so that's good. So I think I bring that. I think I'm a responsible councillor who listens to people and takes the time to try and put myself in their shoes. It's not always easy, because people contact me from outside of Ward 6 with an issue that I'm not really familiar with, like people on septic systems, for instance, and they've got some issue that's very important to them, not exactly a municipal hot item, but I try and put myself in their shoes. Mm-hmm. And they're looking for help, and sometimes I have a feeling I'm the last guy they've come to. Not Mike Bondy, but a counselor. Mm-hmm. They've run out of options with staff, and they've been on hold, and they're not getting anywhere. So when they come to me, there's a level of desperation, and I try and tune into that right away. And that's not easy because I haven't been dealing with their issue for 7 months like they have. Mm-hmm. So I try and do that. I guess empathetic would be the word, maybe not. But yeah, so that's what I bring, and I hope to bring it back for 4 more years.
Well, Mike, I really appreciate your candidness, and I appreciate your humility, and I appreciate you coming out today.
All right,
thanks very much.
Thank you, Dan. All right, great, thank you.